Hi,
Hi,
everyone, and
everyone.
welcome. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar. My name is Rochelle, and I'll be your host for today's sessions. We will be getting started in just a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to log in. While we wait, I have a few housekeeping things to share with you. First, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the recording along with any additional resources after the session. So keep an eye out on your inboxes. We also encourage you to engage with us throughout the session. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the Q&A feature at any time. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible during the dedicated Q&A portion at the end. Right. Sorry. All right. I see more people joining, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us on today's webinar, Cracking the CMMC Code, Strategies, Automation, and Audit Insights. With us today, we will be having Adam Glover from Inside Assurance as Director of Audit Services doing part of the presentation. Adam, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Adam Glover, I'm a director here with Inside Assurance, and I've been working with CMMC in some capacity for about a decade now. So going all the way back to 2016 when this journey first started. So excited to talk to everyone today.
Thank you, Adam. We also have Justin Graham, co-founder of Steadfast Partners, also joining us as a speaker. Justin, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Justin Graham, co-founder of Steadfast Partners. We specialize in providing CMMC readiness services. There's just so much happening with CMMC right now. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation and hopefully leaving with you a few key takeaways to help you on your CMMC journey.
All right. Thank you so much. And we also have Rob Gutierrez, Senior Cybersecurity and Compliance Manager at Secureframe. Rob, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you. Glad to be here. Rob Gutierrez, Senior Cybersecurity and Compliance Manager at Secureframe. Secureframe is a compliance automation platform that supports CMMC as well as over 40 other frameworks, and we help our customers get audit ready. I've been working with many customers at Secureframe for a little over 3.5 years, and my background's in the FedRAMP and federal space, so well-versed in everything federal compliance, and excited to chat with Justin and Adam and talk through CMMC today.
Awesome. Well, thank you and welcome, everybody. I look forward to the exciting conversation we're going to have soon. In terms of what we'll be covering today, we're going to be talking about the CMMC landscape and what's changing, preparing for CMMC and building your readiness strategy, automation in action and streamlining your CMMC journey inside the certification process. And this will be an auditor's perspective. And the expert panel discussions with the Q&A. And then at the end, we'll have the key takeaways and additional Q&As. So like I said earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in our chat to the right. And we will be happy to address them either live or at the end, towards the end of the webinar for you guys. Without further ado, I will pass on the baton to Adam.
Awesome, thanks. So talking a little bit about the history of CMMC and its evolution. So as I kind of mentioned a little bit in my intro, CMMC started way back in 2016 with the introduction of the DFAR 7012 clause. and that also introduced NIST 800-171. So that's the foundation for what we now know as CMMC. A little bit after that, I think it was around 2018, 2019, somewhere in that time frame, CMMC 1.0 came out. So that was during the first Trump administration. And then subsequent to that is when CMMC 2.0 came out. So that's what we know and love today. Some of the biggest changes between 1.0 and 2.0 is 1.0 was a 5-level maturity model. So it was really and truly more of a maturity model than what we see today. Whereas CMMC 2.0 only has 3 levels, with level 1 being focused on FCI, level 2 being focused on CUI, and then level 3 being focused on some of those advanced classifications of CUI. Its impacts are really kind of far-reaching. I know in the last rule that was just published here a few weeks ago, the government updated their numbers, and they're now estimating just shy of 338,000 organizations will need some level of CMMC support. Out of those 338, they're estimating somewhere around 122,000 will need a level 2 and or level 3 certification. The difference between level 2 and level 3, so all level 3 clients still have to go through a level 2 certification with a C3PAO. The additional level 3 controls will then be examined and assessed by the government, by the DIBCAC agency. So that's the big difference there. Some of the most common misconceptions, I would say really the biggest one out there is its alignment to FedRAMP. FedRAMP is an older, more mature, more established framework. A lot of clients think they know FedRAMP, so by default, they know CMMC. And because they've done FedRAMP before, or they've passed a FedRAMP assessment before, well, then that means CMMC is just in the bag, because FedRAMP is based on NIST 800-53. CMMC is based on 800-171, and 171 is a subset of 53. So if they're meeting the FedRAMP requirements and they're meeting the 53 requirements, well, there's no reason at all they can't meet the 171 requirements. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. So I think that's a really eye-opening situation for a lot of clients, is they need to realize that CMMC really is its own unique animal, and there's no easy button to doing this, unfortunately. So I'll pass it over to I think, is it Rob next or no? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. Thanks. So today I wanted to break down strategy when it comes to the readiness side of your CMMC certification journey. To start with, it's important to at least identify at a high level the 3, let's call them natural phases any organization going down the CMMC certification path is going to face. It's going to be readiness, remediation, and certification audit. So very simply, readiness is going to be identifying any gaps. Remediation is fixing the gaps. And then the certification audit is the C3PO piece. So of these 3, I consider phase 1, the readiness portion, to be the most critical, and is really what I'll be focusing on here today. So if you don't want any surprises when it comes, to the certification audit time, it's very important to properly scope and assess the baseline, implementation status of the 110 controls and objectives, under 800-171 to start with. Phase 2 is remediation. So if you don't accurately identify your gaps in phase 1, I mean, guess what? They're not going to get fixed. So a true readiness assessment is really, going to be key here. So jumping back into strategy for a minute, is important to, understand the cyber AB, right, who manages the CMMC program. They very clearly came out and, reaffirmed that any organization that provides consulting or readiness type services cannot be the entity that conducts the certification audit, to keep independent. So basically auditors aren't, grading their own work, so to say. So as you're planning your strategy, and you have to account for this, it's very clear that you have to engage with an accredited C3PO like Inside Assurance to perform the certification audit. But some organizations may not understand that a separate entity has to conduct the readiness work. So just keep this in mind, as you're planning your own strategy and timelines. With that, timeline, is something that's important, I think, to discuss here, as well. In my experience, and really what I'm seeing in the industry, the typical timeline for achieving certification, like when we're talking, start to certification in hand, is about 9 to 12 months. This is average. If you have management commitment and a highly mature security program that's aligned, with NIST 800-171, yeah, it's possible to get it done quicker, but at the same time, like I've seen it extend beyond the 9 to 12 month average too. I'll give you 2 takeaways around timeline that I want you to pay attention to, and these are the unknowns, right? So as you navigate through these 3 phases, right, readiness, remediation, certification audit, and you're developing your strategic timeline, there's 2 big unknowns. First, how much remediation is there going to be, and how long is that going to take? So is it going to be an easy fix that can be addressed in, like, let's say a few days? Or, on the other side, are you going to have to implement, a FedRAMP moderate equivalent enclave and rewrite your entire policy and procedure set and SSP documentation? 2 completely different things. So until you go through a true readiness gap assessment to identify where the gaps are, you don't know what this piece of the timeline is going to be. So again, going back to what I'm seeing, it would be about, I would say, a 90-day period on average to account for remediation time. So just keep that in mind, for planning purposes. Second, when it comes to unknowns, I'm sure Adam will acknowledge this. Like as you move through these 3 phases, right? Readiness, remediation, certification audit, you have to understand there could be a bit of a demand problem on the C3PO side. So some C3POs like already booking out into 2026. So this is just another nuance that you have to address early on. Just make sure, you get on the schedule of a C3PO before it's too late. So with all that, let's go ahead and move on from strategy for a minute. I want to talk about some common gaps that we've seen organizations face when they, complete their readiness exercises. First is going to be scope. So understanding where CUI flows in your organization is the most important element of conducting a true readiness assessment. Any system that processes, stores, or transmits CUI is included in the boundary. A couple things I've seen. First, like a lot of organizations don't even know what CUI is. That is a great starting point. Second, you have to chase down really the data flow of how you receive CUI, how it's handled, stored, really to properly scope the boundary of your CUI environment. The definition of CUI is maintained by the National Archives. There's, several categories CUI can fall under. In my experience, the most common category is primarily around controlled technical information under the defense index grouping, but there's others as well. But bottom line, you have to understand where your CUI is before you can even start assessing against the environment that protects it. It's pretty straightforward stuff. The second gap or really issue I see is organizations underestimating the amount of effort it takes to develop a system security plan or SSP. So at a high level, an SSP documents really as a written narrative, the people, process, technology, and responsibility of how each of the 110 controls and objectives under 800-171 is implemented. It also requires a high degree of accuracy. It can't be vague. So you're gonna have to chase down a lot of folks, to get the details of how each, control or objective is performed and document it accurately. Automation is key here. Rob's gonna go into, more depth on this. But it's a big lift, if you do it what I call it the traditional way, right? Using Excel and Word docs. And it makes a lot of sense to leverage automation to make it a more efficient process. The last point I want to make, when it comes to common gaps we're seeing, in the readiness phase is around FedRAMP equivalency. I'm just going to jump right in and be direct. If you're using commercial Microsoft licensing for email and your workflows include sending CUI, over email, you're gonna have to address that because in September 2024, right at a year ago, Microsoft made it public, clarifying this change. So this, topic of FedRAMP equivalent is probably a webinar of its own. We could probably spend the whole hour here, but just understand that if you use a cloud service provider, it's required for them to be FedRAMP moderate authorizer equivalent. All this is spelled out, DFARS 7012, 7020, but I think it's noteworthy, at least to just point this out as a common gap that I've seen in my experience. This is one of those areas that can trigger some significant remediation efforts. So just keep that in mind. And really in closing here, before I pass on to Rob, the key takeaway, that I want to leave you with, CMMC success really hinges on preparation. So readiness isn't just, a box to check. It's the foundation that determines like how smooth or painful like the rest of this journey is going to be. If you scope your CUI correctly, invest the time and resources in building out an accurate SSP and getting ahead of like the bigger challenges, like the FedRAMP equivalency that we're talking about, C3PO scheduling, you're really going to set yourself up, to move through remediation and into certification with confidence. You want to be in a spot where what the result of the audit is going to be going into it, right? Passing. So with that, I'll pause there. Rob, I think I'll pass it to you to talk a little automation.
Yeah. And a couple things to point out there too before we move on to the next slide, just to piggyback off that.
Yeah.
To Justin's point there. So I went over the numbers a little bit ago, right? There's about 122,000 organizations that are going to need certification. Right now, today, there's about 75 C3PAOs that exist. So you can imagine the supply demand scenario that organizations are facing. So to your point, the sooner you can engage with a C3PAO and get on their schedule, the better. And then the other point was surrounding the equivalency and kind of where that goes. So just make sure that your enclave is equivalent, or you can somehow prove it otherwise. And a lot of times, and I'm sure Rob can touch on this a little bit, but proving equivalency is often harder than just achieving FedRAMP authorization. So if you're going to be equivalent, you might as well just go through the whole FedRAMP process. But yep. Sorry, go ahead. Rob.
No, yeah, you're right. For FedRAMP moderate equivalency, you have to be at 100%. POEMs are not allowed. You need to meet every single control, and that means being compliant with over 350 different requirements, which to Adam's point, that's probably, in my opinion, that's harder than just going through a FedRAMP moderate authorization in itself. And right. I've seen a lot more organizations get FedRAMP moderate authorized than FedRAMP moderate equivalent. It's a tall task for sure. And I also just want to piggyback what Adam and Justin have been saying about the importance of and the toughness of that phase one, and especially that scoping and those CUI workflows. Like from my personal experience, as well as my customers' experience and the firsthand views of that the scoping and that getting through that phase one is harder than phase two in the audit. And if you don't do it properly, you're just setting yourself, you're going to be sent back to the drawing board. But you really got to do it properly. And if you do it properly, then you'll have an easier audit. And honestly, the audit will be almost a lot quicker than that's for scoping in phase one. So can't recommend working with Justin and the team at Steadfast or really any vCISO to help you through those scoping efforts. It's really can be tough, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Like Justin said, if you don't even know what CUI is, would definitely recommend reaching out to the folks at Steadfast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a big part of the readiness and preparation phase too is being sure to consider a mock assessment with your C3PO as well. That really provides you with a solid safety net where if something is wrong and you're not aware of it or whatever, you're not risking failing the assessment and starting all over. There is still a chance, depending on what's failing, there is a chance you could go on a POAM and be conditionally certified, but that's a risk most people aren't willing to take given the expensive nature of this ecosystem.
Totally. And those risks not just expensive, but they become timely, right? They can set you back 2-3 months, in different types of risks, whether it's scoping or CUI related or FedRAMP equivalency related, kind of like Justin was saying, if you have to replace your whole tech stack or start making a lot of changes to self-host things or move to FedRAMP authorized vendors, those things can take time. So these are really important questions to address as soon as you can. I think so. Yep. Whoops. Yeah. So I think we're jumping into automation. Topic near and dear to my heart at Secureframe, and honestly, something that I couldn't. So for those who don't know, Secureframe just became CMMC authorized level 2. We went through an independent assessment with a third-party auditor. It was a great experience for us to get certified and authorized, and great experience for us to be able to support our customers better, and also to really understand the process. And I can say from firsthand, I could not imagine doing it without Secureframe and without automation. It is a beast, Secureframe. We are also we are also SOC 2 and ISO authorized, and now FedRAMP 20X. So, we're very familiar with compliance and audits and providing evidence, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. CMMC is a beast. It's really hard. It's a lot closer to a FedRAMP moderate or a PCI audit, if you're familiar, than a SOC 2 type 1. There's this pretty significant level of effort, and thankfully our tool makes it a lot easier. We really help you get all your ducks in a row. We are a full-on GRC platform with federal capabilities like SSP generation, POAM tracking, SPRS scoring. So our platform gives you that full suite of everything you need to get CMMC compliant. Includes not just the SSP, but all the policies or procedures that you would want with that related to whether it's access controls or encryption and key management or vulnerability and patch management policy. We have all the policies that you'd need, and we help link it all to controls, requirements, tests, and your SSP language, and we prepare it so that we can put it on a silver platter for Adam and his team over at Insight. And it's all connected. We have an audit module in there, so the auditors can go in and do their audits within the platform. And it really gives customers one place to do their whole audit and to get compliant, and just makes things easier. You're not using as many spreadsheets or Google Docs or Dropbox, wherever you're using SharePoint sites. It's really easy to track everything in one place. We also work with a lot of organizations that don't just focus on CMMC, but they work with other government agencies, and they need to be NIST 853 compliant or TextRAMP or GovRAMP. And our platform has everything cross-mapped, so you can efficiently work towards CMMC as well as other frameworks, and get to see that overlap and make sure that whatever control you're implementing for CMMC could work for a NIST 853 or a FedRAMP or TextRAMP or whatever. And then POAM tracking in the platform, so you can link any POAMs or issues can be linked to any CMMC requirement or assessment objective down to the T. You can document your remediation plans. We have a nice 180-day tracker in there as well. So once you create that POAM, the system keeps you accountable for that 180-day, 6-month time period that CMMC allows for remediation for any POAMable assessment objectives. And then SPRS scoring to just kind of track your progress towards that ultimate goal of 110 as you make progress through the platform. And again, it's really nice, gives you good visuals and everything is connected in the platform, so that as you make any moves or upload evidence or, fix a certain integration or a certain configuration in AWS, everything is updating accordingly. And again, it's just, our platform was already helpful for CMMC, but since we're able to use it for our audit, almost dog fooded it in a sense. It's just made it a lot better and more comprehensive. So we're really excited about all the stuff we're doing for CMMC to help our customers through their readiness journeys.
Rob, I really like how you compared the effort of getting a CMMC certification to other common, certifications like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. I think one of the nuances to CMMC is just the nature of it. It's very heavy on documentation. And I just want to double down on what he talked about with these modules within Secureframe, right? That manage the POAM, manage the SSP, manage the policies and procedures over time. This automation makes it so much easier. It's not a one-time thing, right? CMMC, you have to keep this going long-term. So having that central point where you can easily go in and monitor and update your documentation over time is huge. So I just wanted to definitely emphasize that point.
Thank you. Yeah. And we haven't even talked about some of the other modules that we have in our platform, right? Like vendor management and risk assessments. These are security training, role-based training. These are all different requirements that are part of CMMC. So when you work with Secureframe, you get that whole package. So that and all of the different capabilities that we offer as a GRC platform. So really just trying to make it as easy as possible and give our customers one place to do everything. Once again, so that when Adam and his team come in, everything's on a silver platter and ready to go. Make that audit a lot easier than the readiness part, at least.
Exactly. All right. All right. Yeah, the next one's me. So talking about the certification process and some of the things to expect. So the CMMC assessment process is governed by the CAP, which is given to us by the Cyber AB. It's also broken down into several phases. So not to be confused with the phases that Justin mentioned earlier about readiness, remediation, and assessment. The assessment itself is broken down into phases. The first phase is what's called the pre-assessment phase. So that's where we'll ask for your core foundational information. So your SSP, any responsibility matrices you have, your network diagrams, your data flow charts, your cage code, things of that nature. Be sure you have a cage code. That is also a requirement. We have come across folks that tried to undergo a CMMC assessment without a cage code. We cannot do anything in EMAS without a cage code. So keep that in mind as well. And then we obtain a listing of your body of evidence. So we're not necessarily concerned about the actual artifacts. We just want to know how many artifacts you have. So primarily what we're looking for there is your readiness to move forward with scheduling an actual assessment. Some of the biggest red flags we'll see during the pre-assessment phase are with the body of evidence being too small. So as an example, if you only have like 60 or 70 items in your body of evidence, you probably don't have enough. We're probably looking at around 200 items, give or take, depending on the scope of the audit. Same thing with the size of your SSP. Typically, again, to Justin's point, the documentation is very heavy. So if your SSP is like 50 or 60 pages, probably not good enough to go forward with the assessment. And then the other thing that we run into quite a bit actually is people will hand us the package, like I just mentioned. So they'll hand us the SSP, the network diagram, and the responsibility matrix, and be like, hey, here you go. Here's the package. Figure out how these three documents work together. And they kind of put the onus on the assessor to figure out what links to what, who's responsible for what, where, and when. I think it's important to note that those three documents in particular should live and breathe and stand on their own. So me as the assessor or Justin as the readiness, the RPO consultant, anybody can pick up any one of those documents individually and know exactly what's going on in your environment. They should all be independent of one another, not rely upon one another. You can link them together and that's fine, but you shouldn't just give you a package and be like, hey, here you go, figure it out. They should be They should be their own living, breathing documents, for lack of a better term. Once we get past the assessment phase, then we will schedule the formal assessment, what's called the assessment phase. Typically, that's 2 to 4 weeks after the pre-assessment ends. During that 2 to 4 weeks is when you'll provide the actual body of evidence. So this is where Rob and Secureframe or any other GRC tool would come into play. That's where we would go and grab the actual artifacts from. During that intermediate time between the pre-assessment ending and the assessment phase starting, we'll examine that evidence. We'll go through it and see if we have any questions. That way we know what to expect during the actual assessment. During the actual assessment is when you'll have a series of interviews and walkthroughs and things of that nature. Things that catch people off guard, I will say, during the assessment phase is when we say we're going to have an assessment week, we mean it's an assessment week. We expect that you as the OSC will block your calendar from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. A lot of times people will think, all right, well, I've got 10 to 12 open on Monday and 3 to 4 open on Wednesday. That should be enough time. I've gone through FedRAMP. FedRAMP didn't take that much time, so I don't know why you guys need that much time. Again, this is a completely different animal. Can't be compared to FedRAMP or really any other framework or any other assessment. I do liken it a little bit to ISO, given the live kind of walkthrough interview nature of it. The other thing that really catches people off guard is, again, you may have already provided us with your body of evidence. We may have already combed through Secureframe, but when we're on the assessment week, we need to see the evidence again live during the calls. You have to make sure your SMEs are there. You have to make sure people are there that can answer the questions and pull up the evidence for us. It's not good enough that we saw it a week ago, right? So that's the other thing that kind of throws people for a loop a little bit, I will say. At the conclusion of the assessment week, and that's the other thing I wanted to mention about the assessment week, expect the assessment week to be a roller coaster. And what I mean by that is Monday, things are not going to be so good. Tuesday, it's probably not going to be that much better. Wednesday, it's going to seem like the earth is shattering and you're going to fail and everyone's upset and nobody knows why. But just let the process play out. 90% of the time, it fixes itself. It will resolve itself by the end. Don't freak out when you're going through your daily hot washes and you see, at the end of the day on Wednesday, you've got 5 things that are trending not met. That's completely normal. I will say that. But a lot of times clients see that, they start freaking out, everybody starts freaking out, and then it's not a good situation all the way around. So just expect to ride that roller coaster going in. Once the assessment phase ends, then it goes through internal QA. So that's actually my role at the firm. I'm the quality CCA for Insight. Once it goes through QA, then you will have the formal out brief. That's where you'll be presented with your official results or your kind of final results, if you will. Then those results are uploaded at EMAS. I guess one thing I skipped, so let me take a small step back. The 10-day window. A lot of people bring up the 10-day window and have questions about that. There is a 10-day window that's allowed in the CAP after the assessment week ends. However, the 10-day window is not designed to allow the OSC to implement controls or create new evidence. It is allowed for existing controls or evidence that could not be created during the assessment or could not be presented during the assessment. So as an example, if your SME is out on Thursday and that's when we're doing the walkthrough, maybe they're sick or whatever, had a family emergency, who knows, and they're not back till like the following Tuesday, well, then they can provide that evidence on that Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever. but it has to be existing controls that were already implemented and existing evidence that just needs to be reproduced, for lack of a better term. But you can't go out and implement new controls, add new accounts, implement new technologies, upgrade your licenses, any of that kind of stuff, right? So then once everything is uploaded into EMAS, then there's a turnaround time for them to process stuff, and then we receive your certification number from there. Once we have your certification number, we transpose that onto a certificate, and then that's what we pass over to you guys as your proof of being CMMC certified for the 3-year duration, assuming you have no changes to the scope of your environment during that 3 years. I think I covered everything on the slide.
So Adam, quick question for you. I kind of broke down like the overall timeline, right? This is from getting started all the way to getting certification in hand.
Oh, yeah.
And you broke down just the audit piece into some specifics. What's the average time just to get through this piece of it?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I didn't touch on that at all. Yeah, so the audit is typically about 6 to 8 weeks from kind of what I call cradle to grave. So from the time we have the kickoff call and initiate the project and start asking for your pre-assessment items, all the way until you get your final certificate at the end. Obviously, during that 6 to 8 week timeline, you're not intensively being audited. It's really just that kind of 1 week assessment week period where you're really in the trenches during that week. But that's how long the process typically takes from start to finish. Yeah, good question.
And I liked how you pointed out in the pre-assessment piece that if your SSP documentation is only 50 to 60 pages, you're probably not hitting it. I thought that was a great piece to really show the amount of detail that's required in these documents. Very lengthy documents, so you have to be prepared, to put the effort in to get those completed in a very accurate manner, because that's what the assessors are looking at in understanding how these controls have been implemented.
Yeah, I would say, but for the average assessment, obviously, some clients are bigger, some clients are smaller, some clients have scoped things differently than others, right? But I would say for the average assessment, your SSP should be in the 200-page range. By the time you add your SSP to your SOPs, you're probably looking at 400 or 500 pages in total of documentation that you'll have to have for the assessment. So, yeah, the documentation burden is very heavy for sure.
Yeah. And, you touched on the diagrams a bit earlier. I know Justin did when he was talking about some of that CUI flows, but, even within the diagrams, which, isn't like text documentation, but it's almost like a piece of art, but that type of documentation needs to be much more prescriptive and descriptive. And, customers really they can't just document where their databases and applications are. They really need arrows going every which way to show every type of data, CUI, SPD, FCI. So I know that's one lesson learned that we've had and customers have had is it's not just any diagram. Like, you really need to document heavily.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You brought up a good point as well about the SPD. So a lot of times OSCs will use an MSP or an MSSP to help them manage their SPD. So they'll manage their SIM or whatever for them, right? And the OSC will try to carve that out. They will not include that on their data flow diagram. And they'll try to say that the MSP machine, the MSP workstation is not in scope, when in fact it is. If it's processing SPD, it's in scope. So that's a really good point you brought up there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, Secureframe, we categorize ourselves as an SPA. So we need to ensure that our customers are properly prepared to how to handle or how to document how Secureframe is handling their SPD. And that's part of the reason we got CMMC compliant.
Sure.
And if I could just reiterate one other thing, Adam, that you said that I think is so important for the folks at home. You touched on kind of the roller coaster that could be the audit. One way that I think is a really a good way to make that roller coaster maybe a bit easier that you touched on, is have those SMEs in those calls. Because if you can have those SMEs in those calls, it's just going to make your meetings so much easier. Your auditors are going to be happier. They can it's a much easier way to address follow-ups off the bat, or address any questions, or show screenshots. I know we gave our SMEs, I think, like months notice in advance, and said, please try to be there, take your PTO around other times, or let's make sure that you can be available when needed, because otherwise then you get into follow-ups and the 10-day deadline. And if you can just have those SMEs ready during the audit, I think it makes life a lot easier for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And that goes back to the importance of the assessment week, and making sure you're blocking off time, and making sure you're available to the assessors. And really, at the end of the day, making sure you're taking it seriously. Because again, a lot of people compare it to other frameworks and other types of audits, and they don't take it quite as seriously as they should, if that makes sense.
Totally.
I think Ro, you're up next.
Hey everybody, I'm back. Miss me much? Okay, thank you so much for joining us throughout this exciting conversation about CMMC, all of the nuances and the differences that have come up over the last 10 years, and where we are now and what's coming up next, and how to prepare. As key takeaways from this presentation, we wanted to make sure that we start with a clear strategy. Proper scoping and readiness planning early on will prevent delays and unexpected roadblockers later. Leverage your tools wisely. I guess this doesn't apply just to CMMC, but in general. But the automation supports efficiency, but it doesn't replace the need for accurate scoping, documentation, and collaboration. So as part of that, then we have to make sure that we understand the audit journey, as it was so well discussed here with our present panel. Knowing what C3PAOs look for and where companies most often stumble will help you prepare and enter the certification process in a better position. And think beyond the certification. A lot of companies tend to sometimes forget. They go like, oh, it's finished, done. I don't have to think about it. But you do. You have to maintain the compliance post-certification. And it is just as critical as passing the audit itself. So please make sure that you keep all of these things in mind as you continue going forward through your CMMC journey. And with that, I will hop on over. But wait, do any of you guys want to add anything to these key takeaways, or it's good like that? Okay.
I do see one of the questions in the chat is kind of along the lines of the key takeaways. I know Mark asked, what does ongoing maintenance look like after the initial CMMC certification, and kind of in terms of thinking beyond that certification. For CMMC level 2 and level 3, it's a triennial certification or audit. But in between that, you need to do self-assessments, and you need to submit your score to SPRS and EMAS annually. So it's important for organizations to do their continuous compliance, and to make sure they're staying on top of their policies, their tabletop exercises, refreshing their evidence, and making sure that they're still qualified with that 110 SPRS score year after year. I know Secureframe helps with that, with our continuous monitoring in our solution. But Steadfast can help with that as well. If you need help updating things, or if things change year after year, your tech stack might update a little bit, and you want to make sure that your documentation is updated. It's really important to continue your compliance and monitoring.
Yeah, I would add on to that in just saying that it's one thing to get the certification, but it is a longer term process. You have to maintain and execute your security program over time. There's going to be technical and non-technical controls that have to be done at either a quarterly or annual cadence that you're going to have to keep track on. And when you have automation technology like Secureframe that's reminding you, hey, you have this quarterly task that needs to be completed, that's a huge help, and it just keeps everything flowing and on track.
Great addition. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next question is from Brian. Do you have any recommendations for SSPs? Since the requirements on scoping are different, should OSCs have a separate SSP from the one they have in FedRAMP?
I would start with that and just saying, yes, you probably want a separate one just by the nature that, with FedRAMP, you're going to be, as Adam mentioned, based on 853, where CMMC is 800-171. So it's a different subset. So it would make a lot more sense to maintain two separate ones. Adam, Rob, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, or a good question as well. Yeah. So again, going back to my statement earlier, the SSP, the CRM, the data flow diagrams, the network diagrams, all of that stuff for CMMC should live and breathe on its own. Again, if you're a FedRAMP organization, you should not be linking your CMMC SSP to your FedRAMP SSP to your FedRAMP SOP or SOPs. These should all be separate and distinct documents that again just live on their own, for lack of a better term, an easier way to put it. It's fine if they have some of the same information in them, and if some of the controls and some of the toolings are the same, but they really should be completely separate documents, because from an assessor's point of view, it makes things even more convoluted. So now we're having to go from this SSP to that SSP, and then that SSP is referencing a different SOP. Then that SOP is referencing this 800-53, and then nobody ever maps that back to 171, and it just causes far too much work and far too much confusion that's unnecessary. So it really is better that they're completely separate. I don't know if Rob has any thoughts on that, but.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah, I love how you painted it from an auditor's point of view. I know from like a compliance perspective, some people might think it's easier to maintain one document, but to your point, you're kind of actually maintaining two separate frameworks, right? And different requirements. So I do think it's actually easier to maintain the two separate documents, but to your point also about how like it's okay to take language from certain places if things are aligned. That's where I would really suggest, like, make sure that the documents are aligned. If there are certain controls between FedRAMP and CMMC that are the same, and you want to if you're meeting them using the same processes or same tools, make sure things line up, because maybe even if they're different audits, you might use the same auditor. That's a C3PAO and a 3PAO, like a Insight Assurance. So that auditor, if they're looking at two different documents, they don't want to see any type of disparity. So it is important to make sure things are aligned, and a lot of these controls are the same, so you can definitely leverage language and make things easier. But I totally agree with Adam and Justin that it's easier to have two separate frameworks, two separate SSPs for the.
And that applies to
you.
CRMs as well, the responsibility matrices. We've seen it. Actually, we did it ourselves. We being Insight Assurance, when we went through the DIBCAC process, we did the same thing where we took all of our vendors and compiled one master CRM, and then we linked the master CRM to our SSP. But keep in mind, when you go through the actual assessment, so when you go through a C3PAO, you do need to provide those individual CRMs. The consolidated master one is not sufficient for the assessment process. We need each individual one.
Yeah, we learned that the hard way, because a lot of big vendors, they provide you the master CRM, and it includes controls for like PCI and other frameworks, and it's like, no, we only care about the 110 controls of CMMC.
Yep.
Okay, well, we have one additional question to answer, and it's from Thomas. If I have a service provider that processes my CUI in a private enclave that does not meet the NIST definition of being a CSP, do they need to be FedRAMP compliant?
I would say something just to kind of lead up with this. Details matter. Depends what kind of service provider that would be. And as a service provider in general, you need to understand if they are able to access, process, store CUI data, first of all. I would also like to look in their question too. You really have to, align on definitions of FedRAMP compliant. It's really more authorized or equivalent. I would take a look. You can pull it down. I can probably send you a link, to the DFARS, 7012, 720 that has the detail. It's like, this is where it's coming from. But it's kind of a nuanced question where it really depends on what kind of service that they are providing and how they're interacting with CUI. Adam, Rob, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you kind of touched on the FedRAMP compliant part, but I would also touch on the NIST definition part. So
Yeah.
the NIST definition is not necessarily the same as the DoD or the Cyber AB definition. So I would be clear on what guidance or what governing body you're looking at when you're trying to make that decision. In my opinion, I mean, I don't have a lot of context based on the question, but I would say pretty much any private enclave that's being hosted in a cloud would still be a CSP for CMMC purposes, and then would subsequent to that would be subject to FedRAMP requirements.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything you guys said. I would just add on as well, like, I'm not sure what is being used in this situation for private enclave, but a lot of the solutions that are out there, Justin talked about earlier about how like Office 365 isn't FedRAMP compliant anymore, but there are Microsoft Azure virtual machine solutions and Google Workspace and other solutions out there that are FedRAMP compliant. So, which is nice. There are more and more options nowadays that are FedRAMP compliant. So it's really worth evaluating, like, is using something that's not FedRAMP compliant worth it? Because it could just add more time and money to your CMMC efforts.
Oh, we have a follow-up question from Thomas. The enclave is hosted in a private data center with servers directly under the physical control of the service provider staff. Sorry. And then he said physical servers.
Yeah, so if it's a private enclave in a physical data center, then no, it would not meet a cloud service provider definition.
But they would need to be compliant with NIST 800, the 110 requirements of NIST 800-171 or CMMC.
Yes, that data center would then be in scope, and yes, they would be subject to the requirements, but not as a CSP.
Yeah, they provide the CRM, and you would just kind of map against that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or their level 2 certification from working with Steadfast and Insight Assurance and Secureframe.
There you go.
All right. Adam, you made a great point earlier, and that it isn't certified, then they should show how they meet CMMC requirements. I think we covered Thomas's questions. Are there any other questions from the general audience that you would like it to get answered? We still have like 7 minutes left. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating and attending our webinar today, How to Get CMMC Compliant in Less Time. That's my title. Here's the contact information for the vendors we had present. Insight Assurance, if you want to reach out to us, you can email us directly at sales@insightassurance.com. And you can also check out our website and reach out to us directly through the Contact Us form. We also have the contact information for Steadfast Partners. You can reach out to them directly at sales@steadfastpartners.io. You can also check out their website. And Secureframe, similar situation. Email them at sales@secureframe.com. And they'll be happy to help you in whatever questions, requirements, or needs you have. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Take care.
So.